Hi, I'm Josh, and I am so grateful you've chosen to spend a bit of your very valuable time with me as I talk about some books today. Now, in my previous video, I talked about a picture book, and I was quite critical of that particular book, although I don't know if you stuck around to the surprise ending of that video. But this time, I'm going to talk about another picture book, well, specifically a graphic novel series, and I'm going to have a lot of good things to say about this one, so let's get right to it. I've kind of struggled a bit with graphic novels in recent years. When I was a kid, I loved all of the Tintin books, and I loved all of the Asterix books. And so when I became an adult and I had kids of my own, I started kind of introducing them to the Asterix and Tintin series, and I realized, oh golly, the Tintin books especially are quite problematic. There's some pretty racist stuff in there. And then I was looking at the Asterix books and I'm going, yeah, as an adult, I can appreciate the humor and the puns in here, but it's all just violence and more violence, and is this what I want to be reading to my kids? So I'm like, this isn't as wonderful as I remembered from my childhood. But I still had a curiosity about graphic novels, and people would talk about various series that they really enjoyed, and over the years I've dabbled a little bit here and there with different graphic novels, but I've never really connected with any of them. The medium kind of appeals to me. The combination of storytelling with visual art, I think, is kind of a cool combo, but like I said, nothing really grabbed me in terms of the stuff that I've been trying recently until I read this series called The Nice House on the Lake. Now, this little graphic novel series kind of falls into the genre of post-apocalyptic sci-fi horror mystery sort of, and the other thing I don't really have hardly any experience in is the horror genre. I mean, I read Joyland by Stephen King, which is categorized as horror. It's not that much of a horror book, and it's not much of a book in general. I didn't like it all that much. And really the only other one I read is called The Last House on Needless Street, and I did kind of enjoy that book a fair bit. I thought it was really clever, really well written, which is funny because now I guess the two horror books I've read and enjoyed are The Last House on Needless Street and The Nice House on the Lake. So something about houses and horror that I guess appeals to me. Now, I never liked to spoil book plots because most books are best enjoyed coming in knowing as little as possible, and I would say this one is more true than most in that respect. I think all I can really say about the plot is that the book opens with this one individual who is trying to set up this beautiful lake house getaway for his favorite friends who come from different groups. He has kind of his high school friends, his other kind of work connection friends maybe, or these kind of various people who either know each other from a friend group but maybe don't know others very well, and they're all coming together in this lakeside house for a vacation. And from there, I don't want to get into what happens because there is very much this mystery aspect where even as I'm reading through the book, part of me is wondering, is what is being presented here really what's happening? Or is something else going on that I haven't clued into yet? And even if everything that is happening at face value as it's being presented in the story, why on earth is this happening? What is going on here? What is the big picture? And so there is this very strong sense of mystery that really pulled me into the story early on and left me kind of curious to find out more as I went on. And the disappointing thing is that when I got to the end of volume 2, which is all that's currently published in this series, it just said end of arc 1, and that was it. It left me going, but there are so many more answers I need. I want to know where things are going to go from here, and the books aren't out yet, so who knows how long I'll have to wait to get those answers. And these books that I read, volumes 1 and volume 2, are each a collection, I think, of several small graphic novels that have been bound together in book form and released in 2 volumes. From what I can tell, this was more like a almost comic book style release where several small books had been released and then it was bound together in these 2 volumes. And so, yeah, I found the story absolutely fascinating, really quite enjoyed it. From the other side of things, the visual art perspective, I didn't think it was great. Now, again, this is probably my own ignorance and lack of experience with graphic novels showing, but from what I can tell from a distance, there seems to be two kind of major stylistic genres almost in graphic novels. You have your mangas that have the very distinct Japanese style, and stylistically, a lot of mangas I've looked at look very much the same. And then you have your kind of Western comic book and graphic novel style that, again, from a distance, everything looks very stylistically similar from, again, my own limited, ignorant perspective. So the graphic aspect of the graphic novels didn't stand out to me. I mean, yeah, the artist, you can tell, tries to make things interesting in terms of having one frame be kind of a bird's eye view zoomed out, and another frame will zoom in tight on a face to capture some emotions, and then there might be another frame at a weird angle to indicate motion in a scene. And there's definitely a lot of skill in the way the artist is presenting the story. But one issue I had was the coloring. A lot of the book was very dark blues and blacks, and there were 11 primary characters who were introduced in very quick succession at the start of the first book. And I mean, I have a tough time with names in general, so as I was reading through the entire volume, I kept wondering, okay, who's this character again? And I would have to flip back to early in the book to see, oh yeah, this person was the architect. Oh, right, okay. And for a lot of those cues, I had to rely on like character hair color or some kind of visual reference, and it was really hard to tell by looking at them with these dark tones which character was actually speaking, even from a visual perspective. Now, one thing I discovered when I got to the end of volume 1 was right at the end of the book, there's a character reference page that shows who all the characters are and gives their names and occupations. I'm like, I could have saved all that flipping trying to figure out which character was which by having this reference available. Well, at least I had that available for volume 2. But even then, like I said, it was hard quite often to look at a drawn character and even understand who it was because of the style that it was being presented in. The other thing that made it a little bit hard to follow is the story is presented in the current timeline with flashbacks to introduce kind of individual characters and how they ended up in the story, which I thought was cool to not only have an interesting overall plot and story, but to have an interesting character study with each of these 10 or 11 characters that are involved in this series of events here. So we did flashback fairly regularly to learn a little bit more about the characters, but then there were these moments where we flashed forward into this obviously fiery and violent future where characters are discussing the past. And so there are definitely timeline jumps both backwards and forwards that made the story a little bit difficult to follow. Initially, I would maybe not realize that we had kind of flashed back in time, or even if we had, which character are we following here again, going back to the artwork and distinguishing one character from the next. So there's a little bit of confusion there, and the confusion was biggest, I will say, right at the end of the first book, or the first volume, I should say. And I think it's helpful to know that right near the end of that first volume, we get almost a reset of the story. I was so confused as to what was going on at that point, and didn't realize that there had been kind of this reset, start over type of situation, which is a little hard to explain, but at least knowing that, if you end up reading it, it's going to help to avoid the same kind of utter confusion that I had at the end of volume 1 going into volume 2. All that being said, it was obviously a very enjoyable experience for me. I really hope I don't have to wait too long for future volumes to come out, because I'm very curious to see which direction the story goes. I think if I were to give it a rating overall based on both the story and the artwork elements of the overall book, I would probably sit at about 7.5 out of 10. If the artwork had made my life a bit easier, I think I could have maybe bumped that up to an 8 perhaps. But yeah, it's a very good book. If that's a genre that interests you, it's something that I would highly recommend. And I do have a couple other graphic novels on my TBR that I've heard other people talk highly about that I'm interested in checking out. So I imagine it's a genre that I'll end up exploring a little bit more. Of course, if you have any specific recommendations, I would love to hear about them. Please do get into the comments. Let me know if you have any recommendations. Let me know if you've read this particular series, and if so, what you think about it. I want to send a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters, especially to my higher tier supporters, Charles M, Abe O, Saver Girl, Mojo Dam, Joanna N, and most of all to my highest tier supporter, Osmandus Perfect. You really do make this all possible and really help keep me motivated to keep moving forward with this channel. So thank you so much. If you're not struggling with current costs of living like I am and can afford a couple bucks a month, feel free to check out my Patreon, and you can always support me for free just by subscribing, leaving a thumb up. I really appreciate you watching, and I'll catch you again soon. Cheers. Hello. The other thing I don't have a lot of... Now this book series, the book opens with a bunch of friends of this there were 10 characters, 10 primary characters. There were, but all that aside, if like me, wish my neighbor wasn't mowing his lawn right now.